Hi everyone, I'm Miranda and welcome to my YouTube channel. Today I'm going to be chatting to you about some suggested January reads. It's a really cold and frosty day today, so it's the perfect time to be filming this video. I'm in my warm jumper and there is still just frost everywhere on the ground outside. There was even a bit of ice on the inside of the windows when I woke up this morning, so it is cold here. And the books that I'm going to be recommending to you are ones that either start in January or that I feel make particularly good winter reading for these cold, frosty, late winter days. I love a bit of seasonal reading and I know many of you do too, so I hope you enjoy these recommendations, and as always I will link them in the description box down below. But first things first, of course in January I'll be reading the Comfort Book Club pick. I host the Comfort Book Club with my mum. Every month she joins me on my YouTube channel and we chat about a favourite comfort read every month. January's choice is Dinner with Edward by Isabel Vincent. This is a lovely memoir about an unexpected friendship. Isabel Vincent is a journalist living in New York City, and in this book she wrote about the very special friendship she formed with her best friend's father, a 90-year-old man called Edward. And Edward taught her so much about being able to appreciate the small pleasures in life, good food, good company. They were both going through quite a difficult time in their lives when they first met. Isabel Vincent was coming to terms with the end of her marriage and really making a big life change. Edward had recently lost his beloved wife, so they were both going through different processes of grief, and they really helped each other. So this book is so warm-hearted, life-affirming. It's a testament to the transformative power of friendship, even friendship with people from very different generations and even backgrounds. I absolutely loved it, and it's just the perfect book to beat the January blues. It's a real anti-diet January book too, which I think is quite fun. This definitely makes you want to pour yourself a martini and, cook a lovely meal for someone you love. But this is definitely a book I really enjoy. I think it's a great January read, and I'm looking forward to our YouTube discussion about it next week. Remember too, if you want to phone in with a message about the Dinner with Edward book, then you have to do that by the 26th. I'll put a link in the description box to explain how you can email me a voice message for the discussion. So I'm looking forward to rereading that again myself very soon. And then I'm so excited that this month sees the publication of Jane's Country Year by Malcolm Saville. This lovely children's book has just been republished by Handhold Press. I think it in fact just published earlier this week. I'd got an advanced copy because I pre-ordered it, and I got an early copy last year. I've been flicking through it and really enjoying it. This was originally published, I think let me check when it was originally published, 1946, and I have an old vintage edition of this book which I love, but it's such a favourite of mine that I'm really glad it's been republished and lots of other people can enjoy it. It's about a young girl who is recovering from an illness, and she goes to spend time with relations living on a farm in the countryside. And throughout the course of a year, she learns to take so much delight in all of the pleasures of country living, and she learns much more about country life generally. And the book is set up in chapter by chapter all through the year. So the first chapter is January, and it's a lovely book to pick up this month. It is a children's book, but honestly there's so much for adults to enjoy in this book too. If you like seasonal living, then you will definitely enjoy this, I'm sure. And it's the sort of book that I like to have maybe on my bedside table to dip in and out of throughout the months of the year. It really is a pleasure to read, so one I very much recommend. And then I got this beautiful book, How to Be a Moonflower, a Field Guide by Katie Daisy. I have Katie Daisy's really popular book, How to Be a Wildflower, that came out a few years ago. This, I think, just came out last year, and it's a lovely companion to winter. When I got up yesterday morning, it was still so dark outside that when I opened the shutters, I saw the huge full moon still hanging in the sky. And I think that though many of us might struggle with the lack of light and so much darkness this time of year for those who live in the Northern Hemisphere, I think it helps to start looking out for the things that make winter special, that make the night time and the long hours of darkness special. And one of the things you really do notice this time of year is the incredible moon and the stars. And this book, it says on the back, the sun sets, the moon rises, a world of mystery and magic unfolds before your senses. Set down the cares and distractions of the day and let the night be your muse. And this really is a sort of field guide to how to enjoy the nighttime more, with suggestions like go out and see the stars, take note of the moon and the different phases of the moon. It's beautifully illustrated as well, and it's just quite an inspiring book to flick through, and I find that it's really sort of helped me to appreciate the long hours of darkness in the winter a lot more. But it's just such a gorgeous book too. A lovely, lovely one to flick through and really enjoy. So I love Katie Daisy's artwork, so that's a great January book to flick through. And then I always mention the Moreville Hours this time of year. It certainly isn't a book that's only set in the winter time, but it begins with the author Catherine Swift. She describes stepping out into her garden, listening to the bells chiming in the new year, and it's a really frosty night, and the earth is hard with frost, and she just describes a winter garden so beautifully. So I always love to pick up this book in January and read that description of a new year turning. I find it really inspiring, and her writing is just so lyrical. It's so beautiful. I have to show you the back illustration of this book too, because isn't that just stunning, that winter garden scene? I love that. This is a book about the author's garden that she cultivated. It's about the history of the garden, and there's just so much to enjoy in her lyrical prose. It's a beautifully written book, and again, it's really a good read for anyone who loves seasonal living, who's interested in making the most of every season. She really guides you through the seasons, as well as through history, the history of a particular place. And her travels in time are amazing. She really makes some of the past come alive through this particular lens of the history of a particular garden and landscape. So, always a favourite of mine. Then, I love Elizabeth Taylor. I think she's such an amazing writer. And Mrs. Palfrey, the Claremont, is one of her best known books. This is a very precious first edition that I have that I really treasure. And this book starts out in January, so it is of course appropriate to pick it up this month, but it's also a good winter read because it's actually very much about the winter of your life. It's one of the relatively few novels that really examines old age, and Elizabeth Taylor looks at what aging means in a really unsentimental way that in some ways can make this book rather a difficult read. There is real sadness to it. She doesn't sentimentalize it at all, and She examines disappointments that might come at the end of your life and ill health and so on. The book in particular follows Mrs. Palfrey, who has recently been widowed. She moves into a hotel on the Cromwell Road and she meets the other eccentric elderly occupants of that hotel. There are definitely moments of humour in the book too. Mrs. Palfrey eventually befriends a younger man. He's writing his novel in Harrods, in the sort of sitting room in Harrods, because it's much warmer than his basement flat. And they strike up a sort of unlikely friendship. And before she sort of knows what she's doing, Mrs. Palfrey ends up passing off this young man as her grandson. And in many ways, he is perhaps a grandson she wishes that she had. Elizabeth Taylor is just an incredible writer, so there's always so much to gain from reading and rereading her books, and this is a really good one to pick up at this time of year. So a good introduction to her work if you've never read her before. But yes, do bear in mind that she certainly explores a lot of darker themes. She's not a cozy writer, but she is an incredible writer, so I really recommend this. For a cozier read, if you're in the mood for that, this month, then D.E. Stevenson is always a wonderful choice, and her book Mrs. Tim of the Regiment is a real favourite of mine. If you love Diary of a Provincial Lady, I would really recommend giving this book a go. It's another book that's written in diary format, and it starts out in January. There's quite a big chunk at the start of the book that's all set in January, and then it goes through February and March and sort of all the months of the year. It's really light-hearted and funny. It's about a young army wife whose husband is away from home a lot of the time. It's about village life, and the second sort of half of this book includes another volume about Mrs. Tim that I think was originally published separately, but it's included in this edition. And it's about her and her family's move to Scotland and her getting used to a new life there. So many of D.E. Stevenson's books are of course set in Scotland, and I love that setting. I always wish I could explore more of Scotland. That's definitely a goal of mine one day. I love to read books set in Scotland. And of course with Burns Night this month, then a bit of Scottish reading is always good too. And then another book that starts in January, right on New Year's Day, is White Teeth by Zadie Smith. So obviously this is her very famous debut novel. I think it's one of the strongest debut novels there's ever been. It's truly an incredible book, and one that's definitely worth reading or rereading and picking up in January. There's so much that Zadie Smith writes about different generations of families, different cultures. There's so much about friendship that comes through in this writing, and it's just the sort of book. It's quite chunky, so it's the sort of book that you want to curl up with on long winter evenings, and it will see you through quite a few days or weeks. You can just immerse yourself completely in its world. So a great read for this time of year. Then a few mysteries that are really good for picking up in January. You know how much I love a good cozy mystery, especially of the golden age crime type. So I have some suggestions. The first one is 450 from Paddington by Agatha Christie. I adore this edition. That's just such a beautiful cover. This is a Miss Marple mystery. I love Miss Marple. And it actually starts out right on Christmas Eve, but then it goes through into January. And a friend who is travelling by train to visit Miss Marple looks out of the carriage window at a train passing by, and she witnesses a murder. She witnesses a man strangling a woman. she tells Miss Marple all about this, of course, and they report the crime, but no body is found on the train or anywhere near the train. And the police, of course, think that Miss Marple and her friend are just imagining things. But Miss Marple knows better. And she ends up getting in another friend of hers, a young woman who works as an incredibly efficient housekeeper, and she hires her to help her solve this mystery. And it's just a really, really good one. If you've never read Full 50 from Paddington, then I do recommend it. There's a great twist at the end to this mystery, and it's a good one to reread as well this time of year. It's a good wintry one, so I always like to pick that one up in January. Then another book that starts on New Year's Eve and goes through into January and has lots of good sort of foul weather scenes, wintry scenes. That's The Nine Tailors, which is one of my very favourite Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries. And it's just one of the real classic Peter Wimsey mysteries, actually. People often ask me where to start with the Lord Peter Wimsey mysteries. You don't have to start with the very first one. I think this would actually be a really good place to start. And it's a great read for this time of year. Really good winter read. And then another Golden Age mystery that is set in January. I think this starts the 3rd week of January, something like that. It's quite specific in the book. And that's The Chinese Shawl by Patricia Wentworth. This is a very typical country house party mystery where one of the guests dies, is murdered in fact, and she's a young woman who is not likeable at all. Many people in fact would quite like to have finished her off. But was she in fact the intended victim, or was it someone else who was meant to be killed? Anyway, I really do enjoy the Miss Silver mysteries by Patricia Wentworth. If you like the Miss Marple mysteries, then you would certainly, I think, be a fan of Miss Silver too, who's a very similar character, an elderly lady who is very good at solving mysteries. Then I always find that winter is one of the hardest times to get inspired, maybe with my photography. There doesn't ever seem to be a lot of colour about. The light is tricky, there aren't a lot of flowers blooming. But one way that I manage to still appreciate this time of year is to think of the colour palette as just being very unique and distinct and unusual and something to appreciate. You know, it's all about monotones and all sorts of different shades of greys and blacks and whites and sort of greens and browns. And one of the ways that I learned to appreciate the landscape in particular, I think, at this time of year, is by looking at beautiful artwork that showcases winter. And I love this little book published by Tate Publishing called Winter. It's a series of art books by them. I think I have spring, autumn and winter. I still need to buy summer. But I love these little seasonal books that are full of beautiful pieces of art that celebrate every season. And I find a lot of peace in actually just flicking through this, looking at the different artworks, looking at the use of colour, the darkness, the light, the very sort of muted but really still very starkly beautiful winter palette, and the sort of shapes and silhouettes of trees that artists managed to capture so wonderfully. And it says that This is a selection of the most striking, touching, transformative, and amusing expressions of the winter season drawn from the Tate's collection. And it's divided into key themes: seasonal festivities, landscapes, labour, and abstraction. I like this because although there is a bit of seasonal, sort of festive, Christmassy scenes, a lot of it isn't. A lot of it is just the wintry landscape in towns and cities, as well as the countryside. So it's a book I really enjoy flicking through in January, when sometimes it's a bit hard to feel inspired this month of the year. And then this is a book that I would like to read this month myself. It's been sitting on my shelf for a while, and I have picked it up before, but I find the writing style so different that I think you have to be in the right sort of mind frame to read it. But I've heard such good things about it. It's called White is for Witching by Helen Oyemi. And it says, why I really want to read it too is that there's a sort of very gothic sounding house at the root of the story. And that really intrigues me. It says, the mazy house on the cliffs near Dover has been home to generations of silver women, and it never lets them go. Reeling from the sudden death of her mother, Lily, Miranda Silver, I'm always interested in books with characters called Miranda too. Miranda Silver is newly resident, young and bright and vulnerable. In this place where apples grow in the depths of winter and secret floors are revealed in the night, she starts to eat chalk and to hear voices. As slowly she too begins to disappear, her twin brother Elliot and her best friend Ori are left asking, where is Miranda? But only the house has the answer, and in this spine-tingling tale of magic and memory, the house isn't telling. And I've heard that the house really is a character in its own right in this book, and it sounds just very chilling and like a good, somewhat spooky, wintry read. So I think that the writing style might just take me a little bit more sort of effort to initially get into, and then once I adjust to it, it will hopefully read a lot easier for me. So this is one I really want to pick up and try again this month. And then this book is always one I love to recommend as well in the winter time that's wintering, a brilliant memoir by Catherine May. And in this book, Catherine May really examines the winters of her life, of everyone's life. We all go through periods in our lives that are much harder than other seasons of our own existence. And in this book, Catherine May turns to nature, she turns to the natural world to see how does the natural world survive winter? How does it survive hardship and deprivation? And she pulls some of those lessons into her own life. And it really is such a good book to read this time of year, in part because it's in many ways a celebration of winter in the natural world, but it's also a very uplifting, hopeful book to read if you are going through a difficult time in your life. Catherine May really writes about accepting that, just as nature accepts that winter is always going to come around, but then there will also be spring and summer to follow. She really writes about the importance of accepting your own winters, getting through them as best you can, and she does give some tools for that, but also learning to celebrate all of the good times as well. So this is a wonderful book to pick up this time of year as well. And then I've recommended this book a few times before on my channel, but I wanted to highlight it again just because it is such a perfect January read. It's set in the late 1800s in Utah Territory. It's about a Mormon settlement, and a young Mormon woman who is a glove maker is waiting at home on a very cold January night. She's waiting for her husband to return. He is someone who fixes the wheels of wagons, and he's been off getting work, but he's been gone for much longer than normal, and she's getting anxious about him. As she sits there waiting one cold evening, a stranger knocks on her door, and it's a man seeking refuge and shelter for the night. She decides to help him, but in doing so, she jeopardizes her own safety. There's a brilliant scene in this where she is having to cover the tracks made in the snow of this man walking to her barn to spend the night and then leaving. And she sort of gets a sled to sort of try and cover up his tracks, and it's so tense and so atmospheric, but it's also just the perfect snowy, wintry read, and it really stayed with me, this book. I loved it, and most of it is set in January and February, so one to definitely pick up this month. If you love historical fiction in particular, then I really recommend this. And then you know that I love poetry anthologies that offer a poem for every day of the year or every night of the year and so on. And this one is the perfect choice, I think, to maybe start in January. It's Burns for every day of the year. Burns Night, of course, falls in January as a celebration of the Scottish poet Robbie Burns, and this is a really excellent collection of much of his poetry and writing, something for every day of the year. Another book that I like to have on my bedside table, and as you can see, the cover is really stunning. So I love that. And then this book I shared with you in my video about books that I got for Christmas, but I wanted to mention it in this video too because I think it's such a great read for winter. It's called The Lighted Window by Peter Davidson. Evening Walks Remembered. And in this book, Peter Davidson explores the motif of the lighted window in literature and in art, particularly Western art. And there's some gorgeous pieces of art shown all through the book, which I love to see. And this idea of what a lamp or a candle or just, a lighted window, what that really means, what that symbolizes in Western culture, I find really fascinating. It was such an interesting idea to explore, and I love looking at all the beautiful artwork in this too. And he writes so well. He takes quite a personal aspect to exploring this theme in some ways too, because he always starts out with a remembrance of one of his own evening walks, whether in Oxford, in England, or somewhere in the countryside, or a city in the night time. It's just really interesting. He's such a good writer, and I just love the subject too, so perfect winter material as well. And then finally, another book that I love to dip in and out of all through the year is the Ivington Diaries by Monty Don. I think sadly this might be out of print now, but I really recommend trying to find a second-hand copy. I love Monty Don's writing. He's such a great nature writer, particularly if you love gardens or gardening, then he is of course an incredible resource. But I just love to read his words too, and this is a diary of his own time spent in the garden, and it starts in January. I love some of the beautiful photographs that are included in this book. That's just stunning. and he writes so well about this month in the garden. So this is another book that I very much recommend. But anyway, that's it for my suggested January reads. I hope that you found something that might inspire you this month from the books that I've recommended. Do let me know what you're reading this January. If any of these titles strike your fancy, I'd love to know as well. But thank you so much for watching. Do give this video a thumbs up if you enjoyed it, and I'll see you again on Friday. Goodbye.